I'm an instructor here at KU in the Geography and African Studies Department and GIST and all over the place. So we have 4 speakers today, right? We have 4 speakers today. Everybody will get about 15 minutes. I don't have those little sheets. Do you know the little sheets to tell people when they've got time? Yeah, I don't have those sheets. So for the people in here, I'll just like wave at you. And you'll have 15 minutes and we'll go one by one. And at the end, we'll have time for questions. So I believe Eric will be leading us off. So Eric is talking about African states, regional organizations, and economic integration. So go ahead and take it away, Eric.
Absolutely. Share screen. Here we go.
Oh, and do you have permission to share?
I do need permission to skip.
Okay, so
Thank you, yeah.
I can just allow you here.
Sorry,
yeah, now it's multiple.
okay.
Should be good.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that was great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Splavec. I am a 5th-year PhD student at the University of Kansas, Department of Political Science. Today I'll be presenting you an upcoming chapter for my dissertation project, United on Paper, Trade Flows Among African States. First, I'll start off with the research question, briefly detail literature review on international organizations and regional integration, as well as details on trade. I'll talk about my data and measurement, my preliminary analysis, and future extensions of this project, and my overall, and some remarks on my overall dissertation project. So the motivating research question for this project is, how does participation in international organizations affect bilateral trade flows among African states? To understand this question, I've estimated a series of models investigating inter-African exports in the time period 1970 to 2018, including a panel of 52 African states. The reason why I'm interested in this question is because there's a lot of different literatures about the effects of international organizations in Africa. Africa, as you know, has some of the highest density of international organizations in the world. Soderbaum, 1996, catalogs approximately 200 active international organizations. That number has since changed, ebbed and flowed in numerous ways as certain organizations have been folded into others. But the point being, there's still a high density of international organizations in Africa. These organizations often have varying goals, responsibilities, and objectives. But a common motivation behind these organizations is to promote regional integration, or a process by which states build linkages with each other within a continent, region, or sub-region to solve certain pertinent issues, be it in water management, be it in trade, be it in migration, security, so on and so forth. So there's this robust system of international organizations in Africa, but we're not really sure at this point how effective these regions have been and how effective these organizations have been in promoting these stated goals. Specifically in this dissertation, I'm focusing on the impacts of Africa's largest and most comprehensive communities, the regional economic communities, which have been recognized by the 1994 Abuja Treaty, establishing the African Economic Community. These 8 regions have been tasked with creating regional economic communities, eliminating tariff and non-tariff barriers between states, the establishment of free trade areas within their respective zones, the creation of a continental-wide customs union, of which each region is working towards in its own route to eventually become a continental customs union, the establishment of a continental-wide African common market, and the establishment of a continent-wide economic and monetary union. I specifically highlight the importance of these regional economic communities because they are partners with the AU. They are independent of the AU, but they are in its infrastructure. They work alongside the AU, alongside member states to achieve their stated goals. So these regional economic communities have a large degree of autonomy and influence over the system. They also are understudied in parts in literature. So with this high density of regional organizations, some people have categorized Africa's system of international organizations as an intricate web of memorandums of understanding, affiliation agreements, alliances, treaties, so on and so forth. Others have categorized this as a spaghetti bowl. Seeing this figure from Amitabh Bhattacharya, 2011, you can kind of see this is a confusing confusing thing to decompose. There are a lot of overlapping memberships, there are a lot of overlapping organizations with similar powers. And because of that, we are not really sure of how much individual agreements are impacting traded goods and affecting the behavior of individual states, as literature suggests. Now, trade is a primary focus of this chapter because African states trade at a low rate. The literature suggests that African states are trading at low rates because African states primarily trade in primary goods, raw minerals, agricultural goods, unrefined oils, so on and so forth. They also point to the fact that transportation infrastructure is low and informal trade among African people and African states is high. So maybe there is not a good accountancy of all traded goods in Africa. Moreover, extra-African trade, meaning trade outside of the African continent, is low, perhaps due to colonial legacy, where African states were set up to be exporters of primary goods. There are very few manufacturing facilities for refined and secondary goods in the African continent today. So these structural issues, along with the presence of these international organizations, complicates the ability of African states to trade. But looking at broader international relations scholarship and other conversations in political science and economics, we see that these kind of memberships should be motivating trade. Particularly GATT-WTO membership motivates trade to a large degree. Goldstein 2007 found that GATT-WTO membership increases annual exports by 71%, and later confirmatory studies such as Large 2019 suggest that the presence of GATT-WTO membership for individual states increases the amount of exports relative to domestic sales of those same traded goods. So overall, memberships should increase trade, but in Africa, we're seeing this low level of trade still to this day. So the motivating question is, does membership in regional economic communities matter? And to answer this, I want to highlight that few articles have comprehensively assessed the impact of international organization memberships in an African-wide manner. If they have done so, they focus on specific dimensions of regional integration, such as regional trade agreement membership or economic development, or on specific geographically defined regions, not politically defined regions. So this ongoing literature about the impacts of African regional organizations, about preferential free trade agreements, regional trade agreements in Africa suggests that there is an effect on African trade, but it's not quite clear what those impacts are, because as I would argue, these efforts have so far been disjointed and have not been super clear in their efforts. So again, by focusing on regional economic communities, which are like units, that encompass all 54 African states, we can have a more comprehensive, more clear conversation about the impacts of memberships in these communities, of which some states are members in multiple communities. So we can have a clear conversation about these like units and how the flow of trade goods is affected by these memberships. So with that background in mind, I want to talk a little bit about my research design and where I'm gathering data. For this project, I'm using export data from the International Monetary Fund's Direction of Trade Statistics. I'm using political data from the PoliDB dataset to understand how the political conditions of individual states affect the flow of traded goods. I'm using measures from the World Bank's World Development Index to account for gross domestic product, population size, urban population of individual states to understand how those factors impact the demand for traded goods. And finally, I use information from the European Commission's Eurostat Geographic Information System of the Commission, GISCO, to account for the distance between individual African states and the challenges that can be incurred, the barriers to trade that can be incurred by this distance. Alluding to the distance more, I am using gravity model of trade dynamically, generated using dynamic OLS regression. The way that gravity models work mechanistically suggests that the distance between states mitigates trade between states. States that are closer together trade more. States that are farther apart trade less. And integration into broader configurations, such as regional economic communities, can theoretically help states overcome this distance because of the harmonization of certain policies, the harmonization of trade barriers, non-trade barriers, and so on and so forth. So I estimate my gravity model in this way. I have this equation log m at GAT plus beta 0 plus beta 1 log GDP, etc. My dependent variableness analysis is the log transform exports from country I to country J and year T. My independent variables are community IJT, which is a measure of joint membership in regional economic communities. And my second IV organization IJT is a count of joint memberships that countries I and J share in a given year. So that organization measure doesn't just include regional economic communities, it also includes GATT-WTO membership and other memberships. I also control for the economic distance between two states by accounting for GDP and other geographic factors, political factors, and population factors in this equation. So using this equation, I have estimated a series of gravity models. I've so far generated 4 models. This is and so far the results are robust across different specifications with different variables included and excluded. Model 3, I believe, is my strongest model at this point. It has the best residuals, it has the best AIC, BIC criterion, suggesting that it has the best model fit. And what we're seeing with this is if we just count for shared RUC membership, there's nearly a 21% decrease in net exports. However, if we include RUC membership and other regional organization memberships, this statistic flips, suggesting that all these cumulative effects of multiple memberships increases the impacts of multiple trade among African states by nearly 30%. And we also see that geographic factors have inconsistent effects and may not explain the variance of trade flows as well. Otherwise, we also see that the distance measures are well formulated and they fit the model well in all cases. So this model is correctly specified. The analysis seems, this is again preliminary analysis, so I hope to rerun this model and to build this better out to be more predictive or be able to make better statistical argument about these outcomes. So my next steps in this research project as I continue my thesis work is to run better models, making sure these results are robust to multiple specifications, including measures for exogeneity and endogeneity in these as well, extending this analysis not only from states, but to regional organizations themselves to understand all parts of this multi-level process. And I also plan to investigate how factors like transportation infrastructure development impact these relationships as well. Thank you all for your time. I'm looking forward to hearing your feedbacks, and thank you to KASC for the opportunity to present.
So done, Eric. Perfectly within time. Well done. All right, next we have Harrison, trade barriers in Sub-Saharan Africa. You want to share your screen? You can take it away.
Perfect.
I think it's nice to share what department you're in, political science, so share what discipline you're coming from, since one of the beauties of KASC is that we're interdisciplinary, getting a lot of different perspectives.
All right, thank you. My name is Harrison Polen, and I am actually from over at the law school, the University of Kansas School of Law. I'm expected to graduate next spring in 2026. And yes, my project is a little bit kind of building off of Eric's. It's actually kind of a more general view of trade barriers in Sub-Saharan Africa and searching for what might be the cause of trade barriers in these countries. So a little background of my project. In law school, in this past semester, I took international trade law, and for our class, our semester project was any research on international trade. So I chose to do my project on trade barriers. And one thing that I'd like to say about this project is I only had about a semester to work on it. So it's kind of generalized and I could only focus on certain regions within the continent. So that is just a side note to make aware at first. But basically, what my project asks is, if there are barriers to trade, which there are, what are they? So when we think of barriers to trade, some definitions in literature defines barriers to trade as just specifically tariffs or non-tariff barriers. Those are traditionally the barriers that governments can employ to slow down the volume of international trade that's entering a country. For the purpose of this project, I'm calling these surface level trade barriers, just for the fact that they are sometimes necessary and that they are used and employed to protect the domestic market. So considering that these trade barriers by their definition are per se trade barriers, why else could there be reasons that interregional trade is comparatively low in some of these regional economic communities as compared to other regions across the globe? So I saw through the literature, a lot of common issues that slow down the movement of trade, which I really tried to focus on and create in this kind of casual chain of where these issues are stemming from. Starts with those surface barriers, the tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but where it goes to next in the chain starts with geography. Geography is a physical barrier to trade that is going to cause issues if you are landlocked, for example, because you're going to have more road that you're going to have to travel to move your goods across borders. But with geography, how do you solve that problem? Well, that leads to infrastructure. Infrastructure is the next logical solution to facilitate the movement of goods, which then that is often created by investment or other sort of debt financing. And the entity that controls the atmosphere and the rules for investment and provides the setting to build infrastructure is the government. So if we were to think of this as a chain, how this research presents it, starts with geography, moves to infrastructure and investment, and then to government. So quickly, I wanted to give a quick trade setting, and this is also kind of building off of what we heard Eric say just right before. There's quite a bit of regional trade agreements going on in the continent. So what that sometimes question might pose is this actually trade creating or trade diverting? So with free trade agreements, the goal is to create trade creation. The basic idea of a free trade agreement is it takes off all the tariff, the surface barriers, the non-tariff barriers that countries would usually experience trading with partners. But instead, all of those are gone, which makes trade freer and supposedly is supposed to create trade. Now, what happens sometimes is when you create a specific agreement with only specific countries, maybe the country that you were first getting your production from actually is not in that new trade agreement. So now you're not a trading partner with that country anymore. Maybe that trading partner that you had before was the most efficient producer, and now that they're cut off because of this new agreement, that it would be said that this free trade agreement is actually now trade diverting. So there's been quite a bit of debate in the literature between if free trade agreements are trade creating or trade diverting. Generally, from what research has shown, internally within these free trade agreements, it's generally trade creating. However, there's still low levels overall comparatively. So if we look to the chain after the surface barriers, we're going to start with the first layer of barrier, which is geography. Geography for landlocked countries is immediately a trade barrier because research has shown that maritime dependency has a direct correlation with higher GDP. The more seawater ports a country has, etc., correlates with the higher GDP, which is immediate disadvantage for landlocked countries as they have to not only build their own infrastructure within their country, but rely on other countries as well. We also see geography creating another barrier in areas like the Western African Economic and Monetary Union, where countries like Mali or Chad are large countries, geographically about twice the size of France, but with populations about a third to a fourth of the size, which, because trade is the facilitation of the movement of goods, the farther people are away, the harder it is to trade. So when a lot of these populations are characterized by more so population clusters or spatial disconnectedness, it just automatically creates a barrier to trade that makes it harder. So understanding that spatial disconnectedness can be a problem, what is the next logical solution? And that is when we move into infrastructure. Now, infrastructure, there's quite a bit of research on the importance of infrastructure and its importance to trade, and it makes sense because trade is the movement of goods. The only way you can do it is with the facilities that support it. As of 2015, about 92% of trade still took place over roads, just to give an importance of infrastructure and its relation to trade. But some countries, for example, Chad, who's a landlocked country, they only have one main corridor that they can get to transport their goods overseas. Understanding that, it leads to invest. And the thing is, so infrastructure is built in many ways, but one way that it can be built is investment. But infrastructure as well is a facilitator in investments itself, making an infrastructure a very important part of the chain. Investment as well, there's quite a bit of research that shows countries, the amount of foreign direct investment that a country receives correlates also with higher levels of trade. And this makes sense, typically because most foreign direct investors are typically export oriented, as they usually have a comparative advantage in the international market. So typically when you get more businesses that are export oriented, your country is going to start to trade more. On top, so knowing that investment is an important part of the chain, where do we go then after that to create a suitable atmosphere for investment and to build the infrastructure? Well, we have to then turn to the governance. And the government in relation to trade is quite important, as trade is a very highly administrative activity. So every time country or goods enter country, they have to go through customs, and all of those are tailored by the custom procedures and how efficient they go in. Part of good governance is looking to try and increase the efficiency of those procedures to allow trade to move the fastest as it can. The other problem that trade can create, especially because of how administrative and bureaucratic it is it's very susceptible to creating corruption, because often instead of having to deal with trade procedures, other government officials can step in and act corruptly instead of facilitating the trade how it's supposed to. So if we think about it as a chain, this leaves the government at the very end of the chain, working as kind of the facilitator to help improve all the issues that are seen to be barriers to trade in these countries. So what this research wanted to suggest is perhaps that maybe focusing on increasing at least administrative procedures or tackling corruption could lead to an effect to helping all the other issues that were mentioned that are also characteristic of barriers to trade in some of these countries. However, the inquiry, I don't think, should stop there. And this presentation also wanted to present another barrier to trade that doesn't nicely fit within this chain, but that is the perception of the outside world. And what I mean by this is, for example, when you have certain companies, like I'll bring up a company, for example, Tom's. Tom's, they did a marketing scheme in the early 2000s where what their marketing was if you buy a pair of Tom's shoes, it will then go donate another pair of shoes to a person in Africa. Now, on its face, what they're purporting to do is a good thing by giving back, but what it's doing is actually just creating a perception to people in Western markets that, hey, it's pretty much saying that people in Africa need shoes, but that is not the case. there's actually abundant leather and rubber and large big shoe producers within the continent that can heavily provide shoes for people there. Now, that's the first problem of this twofold issue. Now, the next issue is when that marketing scheme actually starts sending shoes for free over. What that does is completely dumping a product into another country at a free price. So what that does is ultimately kill domestic producers, because all the consumers in those areas are then obviously going to choose to get the free product instead of pay for something that costs any sort of money. So those perceptions that can result into those aids and into that aid and in that sort of way is another trade barrier that is serious, and I don't think it should be understated, because when products do just get dumped into those areas like that, it can totally affect the way domestic markets work and the ability for countries to trade moving forward. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Harrison. All right, and then we've got Rachel is next with how Afro-Brazilian culture combats anti-Blackness in the Brazilian healthcare system and beyond. And Rachel, you can start when you are ready.
Go onto I might have to do it like talk from my phone, but like share my PowerPoint from my laptop. So I'm gonna try that really quick, because sometimes my laptop doesn't always work with sound. So we'll see.
It's all right.
Yeah.
We'll just roll with it. It looks like we don't have our fourth presenter, so we'll have plenty of time to discuss questions at the end. So keep that in mind. Formulate your amazing questions. How's it going, Rachel?
I think it should be able.
We can see you. We can't hear you. Oh, now we can. Now we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. You can hear me?
We can hear you, yes. We can
Okay.
see, people can hear you. Do you have a PowerPoint?
Yeah, I do. Okay. This is so exciting. Sometimes it doesn't work. Okay. And then for the share screen, is that like view?
Should be just at the bottom. If you move your cursor to the bottom, there should be a little green arrow that says share. Should pop up, when you put your cursor down there.
Perfect. Okay.
Go. And we can see it.
Okay.
You're
Perfect.
you're not in present. Oh, now you are.
Can you see it, everything now? Is it all good?
It's all good. You can start when you're ready.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm Rachel Lawler. I I'm starting grad school in the fall, but this was a part of a course I took at the graduate level. I was supposed to start grad school last fall, but due to health issues, I couldn't. So I'm like really excited to get to do this workshop. But this is about like how Afro-Brazilian culture combats anti-Blackness in the Brazilian healthcare system and beyond. So for a bit of an introduction, in January of last year, I did participate in KU's Race, Health, and History in Brazil program. So I did go to Salvador Bahia. And on the right, I think it should be right for you guys, might be left, is like a calendar of all the different activities we went to. So in addition to literature and many other things, I'll also be talking about firsthand experiences or knowledge I learned from various people, including professors, and then just so many other like people and other people's firsthand experiences within different Brazilian government institutions. So like as a result of this opportunity, like I said, I really got to see and experience like Afro-Brazilian culture firsthand with my host family and then also with the places we visited, but also how like these different parts of culture, dance, music, art form are only like not only like serve as forms of resistance, but also offer solutions to counteract the gaps left by some of these institutions. So for a bit of the literature review or theoretical framework, I definitely, when really formulating this, I was definitely guided by understandings of like infrastructural violence, and then also, you know, the theory of like the triangle of violence, so structural violence, direct violence, and cultural violence. So the ways in which different forms of violence reinforce and affect each other, and also how and just like systematic forms of violence. And then over here is just like kind of like an overview of the different forms of the different literature. Some of it that I've been using, and this is obviously very early stages of what I'm planning on going through, including with my analysis. So some of the research questions I was using to kind of guide what I've been going through is, what are the effects of institutional violence on the lives of Afro-Brazilians? How do Afro-Brazilians combat institutional violence, particularly from the healthcare system? And how can Afro-Brazilian cultural solutions, including capoeira, dance, and music, offer transnational healing methods for diaspora and non-diaspora groups alike? So basically, how can, like, in general, how can with these different methods, how can it offer opportunities in other places? And there's some case studies I'll be referencing a little bit later. So for a bit of a historical context, within Brazil, it had a very late abolishment of slavery. So it's the last country in the Americas to do so. And as a result of that, um, it had a very like deep like race and class are also very often intertwined in Brazil. And during one of my lectures, the professor was very adamant in explaining how the class and neighborhood can influence how people view you and how you identify your racial background and identity, and how much that really influences how you're treated also within governmental institutions. So following the Brazilian unified health system, overall, Afro-Brazilians do face increased incidences of many diseases due to socioeconomic factors as a result of a history of like marginalization and being forced to the like periphery oftentimes. So due to racism, often not being allowed to receive the best jobs and different things like that. However, there's a lot of different solutions to some of these different problems. For example, so in Quilombos, we actually visited one, and there we learned about different traditional healing methods. So there's a lot of different studies actually that talk about how Quilombos, which were actually they're like establishments that were discovered by formerly enslaved people who like escaped, like they often have less access to healthcare. So like overall, they have such a high risk of not having access to health services. And even if they do have them, there's frequent shortages of specialists. They have a really hard time getting appointments or exams. They often have to like travel to different places, and they often have to like cover a lot of costs that aren't covered by the healthcare system. So oftentimes residents actually end up having to like often have to resort to other methods. And so one way to counter this, and like one thing that has happened over time, is a lot of like people in them often preserve traditional care practices. So this can include like herbal teas and remedies. And it's showing how, sorry. And it's showing how they use cultural epistemologies of the body and medicine to like circumvent these parts of like the healthcare system and these parts of the government that don't work for them. And so I think one of the things that stuck with me the most when we were talking to one of the elders was just like learning about like obviously like the tradition of the medicine being passed, like traditional medicine being passed down, but at the same time acknowledging that sometimes you do need medicine from the healthcare system, but all the ways they found to like overcome different challenges posed by these different like gaps. And I think it's also important to note that Afro-Brazilian culture was developing at the same time as a lot of these institutions were, like as Brazil like became a country. So it's not, so I think it's like also important to like note that. And I also think dance and capoeira is also like one of the biggest areas you can really highlight. So both offer physical and mental benefits. And so there's a lot of studies like proving that as evidenced here. A lot of it is also, there's a lot of studies showing that diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and just general dementia can offer a lot of different cognitive benefits. But one of the studies I really wanted to point out that I think offers a lot of potential for replication studies, especially in the US, where we have a lot of gun violence and a lot of police brutality, especially just because recently a couple of my friends were like one of my friends goes to Florida State where there was recently like a shooting. So like she's okay, but it was like really scary for her. So there's just a lot of instances of that. But in 2019, there was a case study in Western Australia where it really focused, it's a region that does have a very strong multicultural society. However, there has been a rise in a lot of prejudice and discrimination. And so this study really like focused on the introduction of capoeira to primary school classes to see if it could serve as a way for like children to like not only have like health benefits, but to learn like understand racism and justice, because capoeira was like founded in Afro-Brazilian culture, and it's like it like is a part of the history. And so to see how that would benefit. And so as a result of this, it had like positive mental health effects for students, and it allowed for like cross-cultural learning and intercultural competence. And so as a way of this, it like was a really good opportunity for just a transnational understanding of the world. And so like it could aid transnational education networks, and it also offers alternative forms of resistance. And it also shows how, for example, obviously like in Australia, there's a lot of Aboriginal people who have experienced similar like instances of systematic violence from the Australian government. And so they can learn the struggles of Afro-Brazilians and use some ways that Afro-Brazilians have used dance or music or artist therapy, and use some of those and then have like another, and then share some of theirs with Afro-Brazilians, and that can offer a cultural exchange. And overall, this study just highlights how capoeira can offer mental, emotional, and physical health benefits for primary school age children. And so again, it's showing like, even though this was in Western Australia, it's showing how this helps even like young people overall. And then art as a mediator. So this photo I actually took when we went on a graffiti tour. So obviously art as therapy to mediate like violence and to work through emotions. But I think the artist who painted this, actually, I think one of the most powerful things he stated was that for him, like graffiti and tagging actually like is kind of a symbol representing safety and freedom of an area from like over policing and policing and like governmental violence. And I thought that was just really powerful because I guess I never had really considered it within that context, which definitely speaks to my privilege, obviously. But it's the way that oftentimes Afro-Brazilians, especially those that live in communities, use art as a way to express themselves, but it also is like a way to signify their level of safety and how free they feel. At the same time, within this same like tour and from the same artist, that he talked about how oftentimes with his art he really tried to highlight Black beauty and to really resist against Western beauty standards that were often imposed upon specifically like Black women, and obviously with like other research I've done, there are negative like mental health effects on being subjected to certain like Western like beauty standards and these like effects. And also art can serve as a mediator or like from a reaction to police violence, so as like a form of therapy. And then music again plays a pivotal role, so like multiple studies have shown this. And I experienced this firsthand when we went to a nonprofit organization with children and how they would do capoeira, they would do music, and the way it would just really, it just totally, it was so therapeutic for everyone and it was quite helpful. And so it does provide a therapeutic element for the effects of institutional direct violence. And it offers like a pragmatic healing paradigm to the efforts of nonprofits and medical organizations. So yeah. So what's next? So basically this is very like early stages of a project. This is kind of something I would like to either be a master's dissertation or something it's either going to be my master's dissertation or I will produce one or two articles from it. But I think one of the most important takeaways is the greater exploration of a transnational context and approach, specifically how aspects of Afro-Brazilian culture can offer forms of healing to diaspora and non-diaspora groups alike. So again, like I mentioned, the case study in Western Australia. So there could definitely be different like replication studies. And I also think the potential benefits of capoeira, dance, and art for victims of gun and police violence in the US can't be understated, even within like Lawrence and Kansas City. Obviously, I would like to do further research into and study of historical archives and the development of Brazilian governmental institutions. My background's more in French, so obviously I would love to improve my Portuguese to have a better like ability to really go through records. And obviously, I would like to be able to talk more with a lot of different elders of several different quilombos and learn a lot more about different traditional healing practices. But this is kind of what I've collected so far and the preliminary things I've learned and the different themes. And yes, that is all, I believe. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, well, good job. Just the three of us for presentation, so we can open up the floor for questions. I could start because I'm already talking. Rachel, I just wanted to hear more about where you're coming to KU. I was curious what your next steps are, and
Yeah.
I'm going to ask all the questions and I'll come back to you to answer. So just curious about next steps, and wanted to see if you've heard of Sarah Hotzinger and her book, Violence in the City of Women. And if not, you should read that because it's about domestic violence in Bahia and Salvador and lots of anthropological work around that. So, and I'm sure she has other work as well. And so for Eric, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the gravity of trade and how you might account for historical linkages in that, particularly if you're looking at a very quantitative study. How do you quantify the fact that, Mali's gonna trade with France more than easily than maybe it would trade with Nigeria or, whatever. And then for Harrison, I was curious what you want to do with this study. Is this something you're going to pursue further with your law degree, or is this just a one-off interest? Just curious where you're going with that.
So I am very interested in pursuing international trade law. So if I could, I'm gonna be pursuing that, and to what extent, and what area, I'm not for sure, but the African region does interest me quite a bit, so I think I will nonetheless, no matter what I'm actually doing for work, still at least look into this type of research.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We'll just go back.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. So yeah, there's plenty of questions really, yeah, so it's easy to control for that. Usually, the way it's done in these models is including young variables. So in 0, 1, if states share common colonial legacy, be it like, so for example, like Nigeria and Kenya have common colonial legacy, because they're both English colonies. So they'd be coded as one, but Tanzania and DRC would not be coded as one because they don't have common colonial legacy. So I definitely plan to include controls like that. Linguistic affinity, same thing. Just look at the lingua franca, see what the most commonly spoken languages are, 0, 1, and those dummy variables are easy to include. So that's definitely something I want to expand into more, looking at how far I can take these results and how far I can push this model. The model's good right now, but I can always have more variables and get a more comprehensive story and see how that affects the relationships.
Do you have to simplify down, like Tanzania had more than one colonial power because of Germany and England? So do you just simplify down to England just to make it easier for the whole continent, or can you account for those sort of complexities?
Yeah, that would just be adding additional variables.
Okay.
Just in different time series. It wouldn't be difficult. It's just the literature doesn't treat it as distinctive. They treat it as the literature consistently treats it as colonial legacy as the last colonial power to be holding the state. So it wouldn't be hard to do that. Thanks for the recommendation.
Okay. All right, back to you, Rachel.
Okay.
You're
Can you hear me?
yes.
It honestly depends where I get the most funding. So I don't totally know for sure. I'm still waiting on a couple offers, so it'll just kind of depend on that. Yeah, my bachelor's was in French history and global international studies, and I got really, really close to a minor in African and African American studies, and African diasporic languages, but apparently you can't do everything. Yeah, so I really I have a very much interdisciplinary background, so that I feel like that really comes across in a lot of my work. So was there another part of your question? I don't remember.
Yeah,
The
I
book.
was just asking.
I have
Yeah,
heard of it. I haven't read it yet, but it's definitely on my list of work I want to read. There's a lot of there's a lot of stuff I need to I want to read or need to read. So I have a couple of areas of interest because I also did a lot of work in North Africa and the Middle East, just because I'm not fluent in French, but I'm at about a B2 level, so I'm super interested in the effects of the French Empire on Northern Africa and parts of the Middle East. So I feel that's what I've been reading more about recently, but I've been trying to get back into Brazil because I have been so interested in it. Although unfortunately I'm not amazing at Portuguese. It's a little different. Yeah.
All right, somebody else have some questions for our presenters, or our presenters have questions for each other, because there's not a lot of us in here.
So many questions for Harrison. I still know how to collect my thoughts. I guess the big question is of the different routes you identified, what was most interesting explanation as to why African states are trading low rates?
I mean, I think a lot of it did kind of boil down to like governance issues is what at the end of rule of law, and especially if there's corruption problems, especially when you're talking in terms of like foreign direct investment, especially that's like historically been one of its greatest impediments. So I don't know, and I think that's where the perception aspect kind of plays into it as well too, because I mean, there is obviously issues that go on, but a lot of times it's based off of what the outsiders think of what's going on.
Absolutely. To that point too, have you read Dead Aid by Nick Bisomono?
I've not.
Okay, I recommend that. It looks at the investigation, the impacts of donor aid in Africa. Talks a lot about the issues, problematics of giving goods and value dumping, looking at like mosquito nets and other products that could be produced indigenously but are imported to Africa by these foreign organizations.
It's a good one.
That's great one, yeah.
Yeah. Western people really like it's written by an African, but Western people really like it. I don't know if Africans really like the take, but it is still an interesting one to explore, particularly with the Tom's example, which is sort of the height of that hubris of images of what people have with Africa and how the white savior mentality.
Mm-hmm. I have heard of it, but I didn't.
Go ahead.
Okay, hi. I have one question, maybe two. So Harrison, I was interested in understanding as a lawyer, or if I think that's what I mean, as a lawyer. Africa definitely is a large space, so, and with various types of like laws or like law
Legal systems?
legal systems.
Yeah.
Oh my
Mhm.
God.
Yeah.
Legal systems. So where are you going to start, or what exactly, which legal system are you focused on? Are you going off of because most of the legal systems were also established by colonial masters.
Mhm.
So like trying to understand which legal system is contributing greatly
Mhm.
to your research topic or your research work
Mhm.
would be very interesting. I don't know whether you have a response to that, but those were my thoughts.
I think because it is really interesting, because there is different, each country has, their own different legal system going on, but especially in the world of trade, a lot of it is governed by like the World Trade Organization and agreements with that. So when you are looking into trade issues, because a lot of African countries are members to the WTO as well. And so a lot of those treaties are kind of what governs a lot of the trading rules. But that being said, that is drawn by, the countries that were in that position to write those rules at first. So, I mean, they definitely could be evolved quite a bit more, and they are written with the perspective of who often has the most power in those organizations. So there's that going on as well, but that's usually the main source of law, especially for trade issues. That is what you'd kind of look for.
Okay. So just a follow-up, and maybe just an addition. Definitely some of the countries have amended their constitutions, to support the local legal work or legal system. So I think that's something that you could easily look into. That's a big project. It's such a
It
big
is, when you're
project.
looking at Africa as a whole.
Yeah, it's very.
When you're talking about infrastructure, I just kept thinking, well, the French had a very different way of developing their infrastructure than the English did, and then the Portuguese and they all had a different way of dealing with infrastructure, so it's hard to sum up. Yeah, the French were good at building roads, and the British were really like to build rails, and the Belgians and the Portuguese didn't like to build anything. So
Also, like, just to add on to that, like the French still are benefiting or reaping from that infrastructure. They're still requesting for
Like payment.
payment from their former colonies because of the infrastructure that they developed.
That's
crazy. Yeah. So I think also just not again, the British are benefiting in different ways through the Commonwealth, through the neo-colonial,
Right.
but
They do it in a
French are-
nicer, like,
in a
we're
nice-
buddies.
We are great. Yeah, we are good people.
Right.
Okay, I also have like something for Eric.
Good.
So Eric, I see that most of your data sets are from the West.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
that's-
I kind of want to understand whether what are your frameworks, like which theoretical frameworks are you using? Also, if and I'm not good with numbers, I'm not good with data, so I could totally be butchering this, but I just want to understand if there is kind of a pushback on this data. We know very well that a lot of the African data that is collected by the West is also from a very he already understands that, like a very colonial, established systems, and so it is kind of challenging to take that data. We need to take that data with a grain of salt, and so are there other data sets, maybe from the African Union?
Yeah, so there's data from African Development Bank that I've looked at. It's just the data from the IMF is more comprehensive, has more coverage, there's less missingness in the data, so it's easy to model. The African Development Bank stuff is good, the individual country reports are good, but there's concern that export data is inflated to promote the state's economic well-being, to make them more attractive for investors. So that's why I kind of chose the IMF data over others with those concerns in the background. That's just what the literature is saying. And to your point about theories I'm working off of, like international relations theory, working off like ideas of functionalism, and working off the idea that states are motivated to join these different organizations to increase their volume of trade, to increase their access to new markets, to help overcome some of the geographic barriers they face. Like Harrison was talking about, landlocked countries. We've done a lot of reading on landlocked countries. Landlocked countries are more likely to join these kind of configurations because they lack that port access. They don't have the ability to connect with the rest of the world unless they go through another state. So Chad is a great example. Sudan's a great example. Like they don't have that access to the rest of the world without going through other places. Sudan, of course,
Uganda too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to go through Kenya. You have to go through Ethiopia, Somalia eventually. Like it's. And that's the thing, right? Like there's this disparity here. States are trying to level the playing field, but it's just how are they doing it? What are the effects? And why are we finding so many different outcomes? Each literature I'm reading, it seems there's a different outcome. And it's like, I'm not understanding it yet. So I want to contribute to that, and I want to add some clarity by focusing particularly on the regional economic communities, which are some of the most active organizations. I could talk about the South African Customs Union. I could talk about the West African Monetary Union as well. But I feel like the regional economic organizations are the ones to focus on for this stage of the project.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
And Rachel, I did not travel, of course, to Brazil. We would have met, but I traveled to Tanzania. I think that was the follow-up trip with the Global Humanities Institute. So when you talked about the capoeira, just that was very, very. It took me back to, because we had the University of Bahia in Dar es Salaam, and we met some of the people. So that's what was going in my mind, and I wish you the best in your grad journey as well.
You.
Any other questions? Any other questions? I can't tell if we have any up there, like on the chat.
That's all of us.
It's just us. It's just us. We're the only ones here. That's right.
Yeah.
I thought we had one other person.
They just left.
Oh, they didn't have any questions.
I guess not.
You
was
answered
me.
all the questions.
That was my phone version. So I just left because
Oh,
it started
that was-
like playing the audio, and I didn't want there to be like feedback. So I just like,
Yeah.
we're gonna leave.
I want to know how Eswatini ended up in like 8 different regions, trade regions, and all your little circles. I'm like, why are they in so many?
It's fascinating, right?
They make good friends.
I guess so. They're like, we're little. Everyone loves us.
Everybody should come to us.
They exemplify the problem of being landlocked, but they need to be engaged in all these different communities because they're stuck inside of South Africa.
Mhm.
They need to find other trading partners.
Right.
Let South Africa let their goods out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. This whole thing.
Yeah, I think the statistic was in like, this is from like 2015, but the average cost of transporting a container for non-landlocked countries was just over like $1,000. For landlocked countries, it's just over $3,000. So just like, that's already just what you have to deal with.
It's factoring in transportation costs and the realities of, different colonial legacies. Andrew Denning, 2024, Automotive Empires might be another good reading for you.
Yeah, KU guy, really. I haven't read the book, but I heard him talk. Really interesting.
If you haven't read the book, because I've been holding on to it since October.
Oh, you are the people. Until they command that you return it right away. No renew.
You push the button where you're like, recall.
Yes.
I always feel bad if you're on the phone.
Yeah, I feel so guilty about that.
I know, I do too.
Even to me, somewhere.
Yeah.
Automotive.
Yeah, it's really interesting because he compares all the different colonial powers and how they developed,
Yeah.
particularly the French, talked about the French a lot in his preservation. How they developed roads, whereas the British were way more interested in rail.
Due to success in India, they thought rail infrastructure would be better, and they thought they could colonize lands that way more effectively, but they still needed the cars. But they didn't invest much in the cars.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
It's a great book.
I need to read.
I will return it.
I haven't requested or anything, I just know I need to read it. I could buy it, give him a few bucks.
Okay. Been sitting on too long. Not like this.
Yeah. All right, well, since we're done early, but we can be. Rachel, do you have any questions?
Or maybe we can log into Zoom in and see what's happening there.
Really, I feel like I've just mostly been listening. I don't know. I feel like everyone explained pretty well. I see the vision.
Okay, just want to give you the opportunity. All right.
We should log into that.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Good job to our speakers. There's more to come.
Yeah.
Yeah.